Contributing editor Doug Hodgdon right here with us today. You'll experience some incredible sightseeing in England. You'll visit the Pendon Model Railway Museum, enjoy an amazing steam train experience to Whitby, attend the London Festival of Railway Modeling, and so much more, all with your fellow railroad enthusiasts. So Layout and Planning Seminar is included in this trip with Doug Hodgdon. It's going to be amazing. So for more information, make sure you click the banner underneath the video or the link in the description. You can do that at any time, and I believe you can sign up today if you're ready to go. Book your travel.
Instant, you can sign up. Yeah, it'd be great. I'm looking forward to meeting a lot of new people, and although I've been to England before, I don't really have a whole lot of background in British railroading, but luckily I have British friends who have been giving us a lot of background, gave us advice on locations while we're there, and I'm working on a multi-page handout of British railroading history, real railroading and model railroading. And, you know, the British started building railroads in the 1600s, so... You know, they know a lot about railroads, and also on the other hand, there's a lot of real good modelers in England. I've seen some fantastic modeling. So, and it's it's different than the U.S. So it's just fun to see a little variety in modeling. So it'll be fantastic, and I'm looking forward to seeing the folks.
And it's always fun to travel with some people with similar interests.
Oh yeah.
Get a big group together.
We're going to have a good time. In fact, I think my Brit buddies will probably meet up with us on certain occasions. So
that'll be great.
The real people that really know the history.
So keep an eye on those dates and join us if you can. That'll be really fun. We're going to move into some photos next. Doug, what did you bring to share with us
Well, this is just a quickie thing. Now, to be honest, I don't really know the background on these photos. I just got these. My buddy Tom sent them from London. And this is just kind of an idea of what you might see over there. And other than that, I'll just run through them, and you can kind of see what they're like. Now, this is obviously some kind of a club. You know, the thing with modelers in England, they don't always have a lot of space in their homes, and so there's more clubs and that sort of thing. And by the way, I want to say thank you to my buddies Tom and Lindsay and Mick over there in England, who are probably watching this show. So
hello.
Thank you for all the help on this. Anyway, so that's one of the pictures, and then here's another example of, I like how they call switch engines over in England shunters.
Ooh.
They're shunters over there. You know, the British have
little
different ways of describing things, you know. So anyway, here's another example. It's kind of neat stuff, and so
lots of detail.
Yeah, and once we get all the information from the Brits, I'll be able to tell you what you're looking at. Okay, here's another one.
So these are all like British locations that we're looking at, do you think, that are modeled?
I would guess they're maybe at club locations, or like I say, I don't know exactly, but Tom sent me these, and now this picture that I've got out here right now, you can see there's a freight train with nicely weathered cars, and then in the background is a streamlined steam locomotive, and I love their streamlined steam. I mean, they really developed the technology. They had beautiful high-speed steam locomotives, and we're going to be seeing some in our travels and museums.
Oh, fantastic.
Okay, here's a little shunter. So, hey, a little shunter doing its work, and there again, it's just kind of, the stuff is so unique. It's just not what you'd see in the U.S., so it's kind of fun to see this unique stuff. There you go. There's an old, very early steamer.
Going back in time a little bit.
So, yeah. And here's another scene, probably out in the country. You can see that train in the foreground's a blur. It's probably going 100 miles an hour. Over in England, they like to go really fast. And so, but looking at the modeling in the background there, I mean, I think their modeling work is tremendous. And the other thing is, you get to, even around the country, when I go around the country, you're looking at things, you go to different parts of the country, kind of different, people have different ideas of modeling, how they do things and all that kind of stuff. And so, we'll probably learn some new ideas and techniques from those people over there that we hadn't thought of over here. They're just across the pond,
Oh, just across.
Just across.
Just a quick skip.
And here's another one. So, there's electrified.
No, it really does look a little different than some of the modeling photos that we've been seeing from the States recently. So
Yeah.
you can see little differences.
Well, I think with the smaller spaces they generally have over there, they really take their time and do it really well. You know, it's not like they do it big and quick. They do it small and really take their time at it and do it well.
Take advantage of what they've got.
Yeah. Oh, there's another one. See, you know, semi-streamlined steam there. High wheel 264. It looks like there. Tank locomotive. So it's going to be fun, and we're going to, with this handout, by the way, we're going to have the history of, like I started saying, of the model railroading over in England too, to kind of give people a background of just how it all got started over there. And a lot of it, well, it's kind of like over here. It really took off after World War II.
Oh.
And they said, you know, the people that weren't involved in the war, they actually did model railroading, I suppose, as kind of a, you know, as a pastime to kind of forget about the war. But then right after the war, it really kind of exploded.
Took off.
And there you go. See, there's some livestock. Yeah. See? And they probably call these like livestock vans or something over there is probably the correct terminology. Now this one here I really like. This is because we like talking about detail on this show.
Yeah.
And look at all this this junk around here and the weathering in the cars and everything, and another shunter. Anyway, very well done. I really like it. Another one.
Oh yeah, you got a street scene here too.
Yeah.
Some cars.
Yep. Yep. So on the trip, we can talk about things while we're on the tour bus. We can talk about things in detail too, and modeling ideas and all that sort of thing. So that's all the pictures I have. But I just wanted you to kind of get a background of what we're looking at for the trip over there.
Yeah.
And now the other thing I wanted to mention is where I've been.
That's right.
I've been. You know, I'll tell you what. The summer went by really fast. It just.
It's
you know,
over.
yeah, it's not exactly perfect weather outside right now, as a matter of fact. But of course, that means it's model railroad weather.
Ah.
So we're going to get things done, and we're going to actually, starting next month, hopefully get into some more modeling techniques and stuff. And so to start it off with, I actually just recently was on a trip in the southeast United States, and I was with my son doing military history. He really likes that. We were doing the Revolutionary War, but I also stopped at some railroad sites, and I stopped in Savannah, where the Georgia State Railroad Museum is. Went to Charleston and saw the Best Friend of Charleston, which was our first scheduled passenger train in the United States.
Wow.
That's a replica, but it's still pretty cool to see. The replica was built, I think, in the 1920s. Then I went to Spartanburg, North Carolina, which is or South Carolina, I'm sorry, Spartanburg, South Carolina, which is really a cool place, just a railroad hub. They call it, the club there is called the Hub City Model Railroad Club, and it's because it was such a big railroad hub. And I went there, and there's some really super guys at the museum there, and I'm going to talk a lot more about this stuff next month. We just didn't have time for it this month, and I didn't have the pictures ready or anything. And then I also, this is something that every model railroader and rail fan wants to go see, is I went to Saluda, North Carolina.
Ooh.
You ever hear of Saluda?
I have not heard of Saluda.
It is the site of the steepest mainline grade in the United States. It varied between 4% and 5%, and it's actually not in service anymore, but the track is still there, and there's a lot of good videos of it when it was in service. But you know, if you're trying to see everything, if you're a rail fan and your goal is to see everything,
You got to stop
you
there.
got to go to Saluda.
Oh.
And they have a historic depot there, which is at Saluda, the top of the grade, which is really nice. And I talked to the folks there. I'm going to try to do some things back and forth with them. Really nice people. And maybe even get a flyover drone footage of this out of service grade.
Well, that sounds great.
So that's what I'm working on. And then tomorrow, see, I just came into town yesterday. Tomorrow I'm leaving for Chicago for the Chicagoland RPM meet.
Okay.
Which is going to be really super. There's a lot of really good modelers go there. And by the way, if you're going to be there, just look for some guy with some guy that looks like me, come up and say hi. If it's not me, what the heck, but I will be there for the thing. And I love getting together with these modelers and sharing the ideas, and super, super, super modelers. So for my projects, I want to try to start doing for the next couple of months or so. I have 2 S-scale gondolas, and I want to modify them. They're basically a standard S-scale car that, of course, is not available anymore because it's so hard to find S-scale things. But I'm going to modify them in a couple of different ways. And so I'm titling my project "The Tale of Two Gondolas."
Ooh.
And then another thing I wanted to work on, because I'm putting together a list of typical structure details, and so the work on structures, detailing model structures.
Fantastic.
And I'm hoping that folks out there will send in their ideas for the things that they would like to see.
Absolutely.
And then, did you mention the Bob Rivard? No,
We did not.
they're starting in November. We got this on the books now. Very well published local fellow, Chooch Rivard, who models the Sioux line, but he does some absolutely fantastic model detailing and weathering. We're planning on having him here for the November 12th. I'm sorry, November 18th. Track Talk Live, and so the three of us should be here, and should be
Really
hopefully
looking forward
making a
to it.
mess. That's the plan. So,
Yes.
and Bob does fantastic weathering. So anyway, that's everything on my list.
Awesome. Well, I'm keeping an eye on questions as they're coming in. Already I saw one, are you really going to England?
Well, I hope so. That's the plan anyway, yeah, in March. And it's, as I said, I've been there before, but it's neat to be around people who know what to look for. I mean, if I would have, luckily I have these friends over there, if I would have gone over there by myself, I would have wandered around and missed half the things, you know. And so these guys, we did, I think it was about a 10-day trip when I was over there one time with these same guys, and we went all over the UK, England, Scotland, looking at stuff. So I'm sure it'll be a fantastic trip, especially with this expert guidance from the guys over there.
Yeah, so Joseph, the answer is yes.
Hi,
England
Tom and
is
Lindsay and Nick.
happening. All right, we're going to dig into some questions now from here until we run out of time.
Okay.
So keep them coming. I'll keep an eye on them as they come in. And of course, always follow us on social media as well. Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, and Twitter. Get your questions in. We're going to start right from the top. We've got a question from Michael, all the way from France. So perhaps it's Michelle? However I would say it correctly, you can let me know if I got it right. He's got an SN3, and his question is, what is the best technique for powering the track?
Well, now he didn't mention whether he's modeling American SN3 or I should say US SN3 or maybe European SN3. It doesn't really matter. I mean, I do SN3 here, US SN3. But as far as powering the track, it doesn't really matter. I mean, either you're going to use analog or you're going to use DCC. SN3 is, you know, the batteries are getting smaller. We're getting to the point now where the battery power is starting to come around. But the SN3 is still a little bit small for that, to have any battery life. But basically, depending on your track plan, I mean, if you're doing analog or DCC, it's just a matter of putting some track feeders onto your rails and you know, space them out depending on the size of your layout, you know, every 6-8 feet you want to have additional feeders so you don't have a voltage drop around the layout. So you put a bus wire, basically a heavier set of wires that follows the track underneath the layout below the scenery, and then attach these feeders across across the layout. So
Fantastic. Good luck.
get a hold of me if you have more questions.
Absolutely. All right, we have a little bit of a detail question here. This is coming from Doug in Kentucky. Doug is running a G gauge, and on the last Q&A session, Doug asked a question regarding the G track and your advice of getting away from brass track and the lack of availability of track in G other than brass. You said that the brass G track seemed to be of a composition that didn't oxidize, and you pointed to the track at the front of your desk.
Yes.
Still here.
Yeah, I did. I remember it. Yeah, right here, yeah.
You have, in the past, also said that you work on commercial G layouts.
Yep.
And I'm guessing they're not outdoor G layouts.
No, everything I work with is indoor.
All right, perfect. So let's continue, because Doug thinks an interesting experiment would be to take that track at the front of your desk after every session, leave it outdoors, and at the end of the month, try running a locomotive on it and see if, in fact, the track still supports good operation. And put the track in some realistic outdoor setting with things that promote good electricity transfer, like tree sap, bird droppings, perhaps some sun to test the UV stability of the plastic ties. I would imagine after at least several months that then you could use that track to discuss cleaning it, keeping it in running condition, and maybe add a discussion on how to keep the squirrels from chewing on your buildings and how to deal with frost heave on your ballast. What do you
Well,
think?
I'll tell you what, we do have people that have outdoor G-scale trains up here. It's a little tough with the winter season and all that, but, people do it and they use this track and they, it does work. But, if you're serious, well, I'll take a piece of track and I'll leave it outside for a while and we'll see what happens. It's made to be outside.
Okay.
So then the other, well, was mentioned briefly, the battery power. In G-scale, you can't have battery power. And so if you use battery power in your locomotive, you can use wireless control. And then it doesn't matter how dirty your track is, your locomotive will just plow right through it because the condition of the conductivity doesn't really matter. So you might even consider battery power, but if you're really serious about this, I will take a piece of track and I'll leave it outside for a couple of months and we'll do
a little experiment. All right, well thanks, Doug.
Sure.
We're going to move on to Robert from Margate. He's got an HO scale. Hi all, why can't I find a curved HO train trestle, bridge, viaduct from a known manufacturer? I made one myself, but it's out of scale, 1/87th, and not too realistic. What materials would you suggest to use?
Well, first of all, I think the problem is with curved bridges is that there's many different radiuses that people use. I mean, they'd have to have 50 different size bridges depending on the radius of the curve, and so it'd be kind of impractical for the manufacturer to do that. And bridges aren't that hard to scratch build. I mean, depending on whether you're making a wooden trestle or maybe a steel version of some type of a bridge. Another thing I wanted to do sometime on these shows is just have a clinic on bridge design.
Oh.
If you look at another thing I did mention before in another show too. There's a Mallory book called The Bridge and Trestle Handbook, which is really great. I think it's still in print. You can look it up, but he talks about all the different styles of bridges, shows you sample plans, and so it's not that hard to scratch build one. If first of all, you have to study it to make sure you're doing it structurally correct, and then just go for it. So if you have any specific questions, like the type of bridge you want to build, let us know, and then we'll work it out and try to help you through it a little further. But I wouldn't worry about, just dive into it and scratch build it.
All right. Any materials that would be a good starting point?
Well, I mean, wood, if you're building a wood bridge, generally wood, but then, the steel, which you're using to simulate steel, of course, is plastic, bridge sides, but yeah, sure.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, we'll keep an eye out for any follow-ups on that one. In the meantime, let's go move on to a question from Bing. Bing is from Minnesota.
Bing!
Yeah. All right. Home state. I see here this is an HO scale N027G.
What?
This is what I'm seeing here.
Oh, he's got a little bit of everything, it looks like.
All right.
Oh, from Cloquet. Oh,
Yeah.
From Cloquet. Oh, yeah. Okay.
So Bing maintains a G scale and experiencing some trouble with the lights flashing in the lighted cars and caboose. Lighting his LED pickups are from axles made for pickup from tracks. Ideas?
Well, now that we're getting back to that other question, you want to make sure your track is clean if you're doing that. Because if your track is dirty, you're not going to get a positive contact. And another thing is if your train is more or less permanently coupled, like say it's a passenger train and you want lights on, you can interconnect the cars with a miniature plug. So you can wire the cars all together. So if one car is kind of flickery, then you're still getting power pickup from the other car. It blends them all together, so you get even lighting. So that would be a real nice way of doing it. And then, of course, thirdly, on G-scale, you can use a battery. Put a battery in the baggage car, and you can have a miniature switch someplace. And
Nice.
There are magnetic reed switches where you just run the magnet one way and it turns it on. You run the magnet the other way and it turns it off.
Ooh.
So, and with G-scale, you can use batteries. And with LEDs, they don't drain the batteries that much. So that might be another
Really
good way
efficient.
to go, too. And Cloquet has long, cold winters up there. So.
We're already getting into them. Let's move on to a question from James. James is asking, have you used craft paints in an airbrush? And if so, how do you thin it?
Well, we've talked about this before, too. And craft paints, of course, they're really not made for models. So they're a thicker pigment. And they don't really flow as well. But somebody came up with this idea, and I don't know chemically exactly what it is, but to use Windex as a thinner. There's something, alcohol and who
Yes.
knows what else, and probably a little soap to break down the surface tension in Windex. So I never tried to figure it out, but I've used Windex and it actually works great. So if you use water to try to thin the craft paint, it just wants to kind of beat up and everything. So I would say try Windex, and then of course, because it's a heavier pigment, you might need to use a little higher air pressure on your airbrush to force it out. So just do a little experimenting and then get back to us and let us know how it works out.
Perfect. All right, Paul has our next question. Can you explain the basic steps for dry brushing to weather model trains? Any advice?
Well, we're going to be talking about that here in probably the next month or two. But the first thing is to get good quality powdered chalks, because the good quality ones have a dry powder adhesive blended in with them. So when you rub the chalk on there, there's a little bit of heat created, a little bit of friction, and it actually makes it adhere. Now with the cheaper chalks, then you need to do an overspray, otherwise it'll just come right back off again. And make sure your model if it's glossy, the chalk doesn't want to stick. Make sure it has the flat finish.
All right, perfect. We have a next question coming in from a guest. I'm looking at either purchasing an O or HO set. Lionel's probably the biggest manufacturer, but what are some less expensive, good quality alternatives?
For O or HO?
That's,
an O, to get good quality O, you're going to spend more money. I mean, it's just because they're big and they're getting technically more complicated, and they're putting sound in them and much better motors than they ever had. And so, it's much different than if you're going to buy, like, say, an O Lionel train set to put around a Christmas tree or something. That's one separate thing. But if you're going to do a serious model with O, it's going to be more expensive just because there's more to it. And there's a lot of choices in HO. And then, to determine what size, what scale you want to use, it really depends on the space you have to build a model railroad and all that. So, yeah, that's a big question.
Lots of answers then, I
Yeah,
guess.
lots of answers. Big question, lots of answers.
Let's move on to Jorge's question. Jorge is asking, what is the best way to solder power to rails?
Well, first of all, you want to make sure the metal is clean. The solder doesn't want to stick if there's any oil or oxidation or anything. It has to be clean metal. And what I like to do, like when I was laying the track on my own layout, is I actually soldered to the bottom edge of the rail so that you wouldn't see the attachment point. So you do it on the bottom before you spike the track down. You drill a little hole and just push the wire down through the layout when you're spiking the rail down. And if you already have the track in place, and then what I do is I use very light gauge wire, and of course you're using a short piece of wire from the bus wire that you have underneath. So maybe you have 6 inches of wire or something that can be lighter gauge, and it's not enough to create a voltage drop. So what I do is that I just bend a little L-shaped hook into it and then solder it right into if we can go down here on the inside of the rail, into the little recess on the inside of the rail. You never want to do it in between the rails, because then it might interfere with the flanges. So you want to do it on the outside of the rail and use flux, or use a rosin core solder that has flux in it. And with a light gauge wire, you can hardly see it. I use stranded wire because it's easier to work with in a lot of cases. But if you're doing a very small scale, like say an inch scale, you might want to use just solid wire, because otherwise the stranded might be just too big of a clump of wire. And then if there's a little gob of solder out here, you can always just file it down. Once you file it down smooth, you may never notice it. And of course, the very last thing would be to weather your rail anyway. 'Cause you don't want the brass color showing here. The real rail would be dirty. The only thing you want shiny is the top. So there again, you're painting over those the feeder wire connections, and that's
Take
it.
care of that soldering.
Yeah.
All right. Bruce has our next question. Do you have any good tips for pavement or cobblestone techniques?
Well, we've actually talked about that, I think, in a couple of shows in the past. Depending on what you're doing, there are some really good two-dimensional like brick paper and cobblestone papers out there. And if you're not really close up and you're in, like, say, HO or smaller, you may not even need a three-dimensional surface. I mean, nobody's even going to tell. like bricks with a mortar line. I mean, unless you're really close, you couldn't even tell it was 2 dimensions. Some of the printed stuff is so good. There are you can certainly buy other products that have 3-dimensional embossed brick or stone or what have you. And then there's a lot of new stuff coming out with all this 3D printing and all that. So Shapeways is another one as an example. If you're looking for something kind of odd, or even sidewalk pieces, for an example, you can check Shapeways, because once somebody donates a file or provides a file to Shapeways, then other people can use it. So you can go in there and just say you want HO scale sidewalk, say, and see what turns up.
Yes, I have heard of that. I have a friend that uses that.
Yeah, it's
they really
neat.
like it.
And some of them even have cracks. You can buy, like, I have on my layout, I have concrete street paving that has cracks in it. And it was already that you buy it that way. It's already got the cracks.
Ready to go. All right. Well, that sounds like a good few ideas. Let's move on to our next question. This is another question from a guest. Does anyone know of a comparable motor to the NWSL 2032? I have a couple locomotives I need to remotor. 10 Shoto Brass Santa Fe Hudsons. I just found out NWSL isn't currently selling anything due to new ownership, and it's hard telling how long that could go on for. Do you have any suggestions?
It's NWSL is one of the most fantastic companies in this hobby. You look at their product list, and there's just endless amount of tiny little hardware and U-joints and couplings and motors and flywheels and on and on and on. It's just a tremendous company, and I do hope that they get it back going again. One of the employees has taken it over.
Oh.
And so right now, I don't know what to tell you. I'm actually using Proto 64 wheels, and I bought a bunch of them. I knew NWSL was going to shut down, so I bought a bunch of them before they shut down. And then hopefully they'll be available in the future. But right now, I don't know what to tell you. I mean, you might have to, look on eBay or something like that, Amazon maybe, and see if you can find some listed from a dealer that might have some extra inventory.
Good luck.
Yeah.
Hopefully that helps. Edwin has our next question. I'm new at this. How do I prevent trains derailing? Seems like every time I run the layout, I have derailments every few minutes. Most discouraging. What can we do to help?
Well, I'll tell you what. That's kind of the beginners have that problem. But what you have to do is, first of all, make sure you have good wheels on your cars. And for me, I always use metal wheels. If my equipment comes with plastic wheels, I replace them with metal wheels, because the metal wheels just are better, made to closer tolerances. Everything's better about them. And then same with the track. Now, depending what type of track you're using, like say if you got a beginner set with a sectional track, and you lay it down, you want to make sure that when you join this track that it's true. You don't want to have kinks in it, or humps in it, or dips, any of that kind of stuff. You want to get your eyeballs down there and sight right down the track and make sure you have a true track connection. And if you're buying, say an HO, say you're buying an 18-inch radius track, well, what I would always do is the 18-inch radius is to the center of the track. So I would make up a trammel out of a yardstick and a nail in one end and a pencil in the other end, and actually draw yourself an 18-inch radius arc.
Right.
That way, when you lay the track down, you know you got it exactly at the right radius.
Right, and that'll keep it in alignment.
Yeah, so.
Good luck.
Get a hold of us, let us know.
Yes, hopefully it starts to go a little bit more smoothly. Let's move on to Harry's question. Harry read once or twice about filling track gaps with something, and then I forget what it's called. I have one gap I missed and want to smooth it out with something. Any ideas for Harry?
Well, if it's an insulated gap or just a rail gap. Now, depending on how big the gap is, first of all, and there's a lot of different ways to do it, but if it's a fairly small gap and it's at where you already have a fish plate, a rail joiner in, like this piece down there, you can take a small piece of rail and cut it down. I use a Dremel tool, it makes it real easy. Cut a little sliver of rail. That's what the real railroads do when they adjust tracks. So you could actually put that in there and then solder across the whole thing on the outside of the web again, and then file it all smooth, and then you never even know you put it in there. Oh, the one other thing, in the bottom side of the rail has the foot in the bottom. In order to get it into the rail joiner, you have to cut that off. So basically the rail is going to look kind of like a T without that bottom web on it. And then it'll slide right into one of these rail joiners. And like I say, you can solder it across and it's good. If it's an insulated gap, you can use, people use body putty or a piece of just rigid styrene in there. Or epoxy, and then just file it smooth and do the same thing. So you could do it a little more than you think you need, and then let it dry in there, and then you can just file it smooth. And yeah, once you're weathered your track and all that, you'd never know it.
Perfect fill. All right. Our next question is from a guest. Do you have an HO track cleaning car that you really like?
Well, you know, I do, although I don't have HO anymore, but I tried about every brand you could possibly imagine back in the old days, you know, and there was one super heavy one called the ribbon rail, which had a block of, just an abrasive block. It's almost like a block for like a knife sharpening block, you know, that type of thing, stone, knife sharpening stone. And then it would just slide along the track and clean it up. And you can buy Centerline Products track cleaning cars, which are heavy metal car again, and they have a roller in there that's sort of like a, oh, it's a brass roller, so it's heavy, and then you wrap it with a heavy-duty paper towel, and then you can add track cleaning fluid to that, and let it run that way. There's also the Clean Machine by Tony's Train Exchange, which I like, which is a tank car that you can put cleaning fluid in there.
Oh.
You can adjust the needle valve so it just kind of drips on this little pad in the bottom, and it'll clean it that way. So there's a lot of different ways of doing it. Depending on how dirty your track is and the conditions, you might want to use a little bit of everything. You know, sometimes we put two track cleaning cars together, put an abrasive one on, and then follow it, you know, couple it up to a wet pad one.
Ooh,
so
that would really get the job done.
Yeah.
All right, if you are just joining us and you weren't here for the very beginning of the event, Joseph's question that you'll see here, are you really going to England? Yes, Doug is going to England, and you should be able to see in the chat box or the link in the description how you can sign up and join as well. Pretty exciting trip, lots of fun things that you'll be able to do, and hang out with Doug, get some of these tips firsthand. So that should be really exciting.
It'll be a jolly good time.
Yeah. Oh, and you're going to be learning some British vocabulary as well. I already know that it's starting. We're getting really into it. So make sure to click the link, check in on that if you would like to travel in March. Let's move on to Irvin's question. Is it better to use the smaller track pieces for a layout or to use the longer 30 to 36 inch pieces? I'm talking about using them during longer runs or longer curves. When bending the longer pieces around curves, one of the rails gets longer or shorter, so how do you handle it?
Well, that is a good question, and if you're kind of a newbie, you're probably better off using rigid set radius curve track, and then you could use the flexible track for long straight sections or very gradual curves, because you do have that problem. And not only do you have to cut the inside rails, like you were saying, but also then you have to make sure that that joint is true. And of course, the rails always want to spring straight, so you have to use a rail gauge to hold them true, and then make sure your track is well spiked down at that joint so it doesn't create a kink. And I use the ribbon rail gauges that are they're metal plates that go in between the rails that will hold them. And I've actually used like finishing nails, whatever I have to use to hold the rail in position, and then glue it.
Yes.
And let it all dry, and then you can take the ribbon rail plate out. Fast Tracks also makes wooden laser cut rail gauges that same way.
We've got a comment coming in. Jay Rush, viewing on YouTube. Hi, Jay. Says, you should check out the Great Model Railroading Challenge over there in England. It's a great show. Model railroading is huge over across the pond.
Yeah, well, we'll keep that in mind. We'll check into it for sure, yeah.
Let's move on to another question here from Frank. Where can I find street and house lights for an HO layout? What gauge wire do you use?
Well, generally speaking, now everything's very low current, whether you're using a little incandescent grain of wheat bulb or you use an LED. I mean, the wiring is very small. You can use 28 gauge wire, and normally you don't want to use big heavy wire anyway if you're trying to string it up through a building or through a mast in a street light or something. You want to use pretty light gauge wire. In fact, I've even used just the enameled what they call transformer wire.
Oh.
It's just solid, very small solid wire, but it has a clear kind of enamel finish on it, so it doesn't short out.
Perfect.
And so that could be 30 gauge.
Okay.
But depending on what I'm doing, I like to use the Miniatronics has some very small incandescent bulbs that I like to use, and they also have very small LEDs. I mean, there's some of those LEDs are so small, you look at the wire, you can't even tell where the LED is. It's just like a little tiny little bump in the wire. And those, of course, put a ballast resistor in with them to keep them from burning out. But I mean, either way, their lighting is so much easier than it ever used to be, and it's very light gauge wire. You can certainly have a heavier gauge bus underneath the layout for wiring multiple buildings or areas of your layout. But yeah, very light gauge wire.
All right. We've got another question about England. Craig is asking, how is railroad modeling in England different from North America?
Well, just from my limited experience with it, I mean, all I know is that there's some fantastic modeling going on there. I've seen some really good work, and as I mentioned, I think because they have a smaller space, they really concentrate on the quality, you know, rather than building a huge model railroad. They build a little model railroad and they really do it well, and so that's what I know of. And then there's a lot of clubs around because people don't always have as much space in their homes as we do over here, and so they do a lot of clubs or module layouts. They'll build a module and then bring it to a club, that sort of thing.
For a display.
And we'll know more by March too.
And report back.
Yeah.
Daniel's got our next question. How do you make it look like there is water moving behind a boat on the water? I do see that a little later in the chat, there's a link here, but Doug, do you have anything to add? Water moving behind a boat on the water.
Well, you could certainly, I mean, it's kind of actually, to start with, if you got a picture of a real boat making a real wake, so it's kind of give you something to go from. But when you're doing your water, you know, you're going to get your water surface in there, and of course you always want the hull of the boat to be, the bottom of the hull to be below the water line. So there's two different ways of doing it. You can actually sink the boat in when you're doing the water, or you can do a waterline model, which you just cut the bottom part of the hull off and set it down that way. And then you use acrylic gel, which is related to gloss medium, except thicker, and it's kind of like putting on whipped cream. You know, you can just kind of, or frosting on a cake, and you can twirl it up and make whatever kind of wake you want, and you can thin it out a little bit with water and take a brush and, you know, spread the waves out from the wake very nicely. I mean, you can do an entire lake full of waves with this acrylic gel. It is really neat stuff. And then if you want to add color, like say you want to add foam, you can. It dries clear, but you can add artistic colors to it and make foam. So.
And give that illusion of movement. That's awesome.
The best thing is to experiment. In fact, interestingly, I took a picture of a couple of different water features out when I was out east, and just for modeling purposes. So I'll maybe show those in one of the upcoming shows, and we can talk about that very thing.
All right, Nancy Jones of Spirit of Durango and Silverton, Colorado, viewing from YouTube. Hi, Nancy. Is asking, I have a 4x8 N scale layout. I just recently bought a new locomotive from Broadway Limited. I put it on my tracks, and the locomotive runs in the track in some parts, but then stalls in others. Do you know why? Any idea?
Well, sounds to me like you've got some rail joint issues there.
Okay.
If you're using sectional track, which it sounds like she probably is that you're not getting continuity through those rail connections. And you know, if you put your track together and take it apart multiple times, those connectors get loose. And so if it's going to be a permanent layout, you can add feeders like we were talking about. And you know, in that case, if it's a 4x8 layout, add, you know, maybe 6 or 8 feeders spread out around that layout, tied to this bus underneath.
She did continue to clarify that all my other locos run the track just fine. So why would it be just this one locomotive doing that?
Well, you never know. It could be a connection. I'm not sure if that might have a wire harness back to the tender, possibly. So it could be a bad wire in there. Sometimes, you know, these locomotives they have a personality of their own. You know, they just like to aggravate you sometimes. So if it stops turning left, see if it stops turning right. Because it might be that when it's going around the curve, there might be a wire that's either being pulled or pinched a little bit, or maybe a wire, because those are very small wires.
Yes.
And they have to bend, of course, when the locomotive's going around the curve. So I would look at that. It may have wipers in the backside of the wheels, I'm not sure. If it has wipers in the backside, and then when you go around a curve there again, the axles may move a little bit and the wipers may not make good contact. So check the wipers and make sure the backside of the wheels are clean if you have wipers there. Make sure the wipers actually have a little spring contact.
All right.
So all of that, but let us know if you keep having problems.
Good luck.
And I love the Durango area. I've ridden the train.
Yay! Well, that's exciting. Oh, we have a little quick tip in here from Jay Rush. To clean out your airbrush after using acrylic paint, you can use Lysol all-purpose cleaner. That would be nice to have on hand.
Yeah, I mean, I just been using Windex, but yeah, sure, I'm sure any kind of cleaner. I mean, I don't know what all these chemicals are about, but whatever works. I mean, I just actually take my airbrush and take the jar off of it, and the cap and the spout on the underside, and I just actually take my airbrush and hold it under the solution and just like push the button on the handle and let it bubble a while and just clean everything out. So yeah, hey, whatever works.
All right. Tom's got a question. I'm just starting out in the hobby and my space is smaller, about 5 by 7. What books or videos do you recommend that can assist in developing some creative N-scale layouts?
Well, 5 by 7 isn't bad for an N scale. I mean, you can do quite a bit on N scale. It kind of depends on what you're interested in. And, you know, like even for me, what I do in S scale, because S scale is, yeah, you know, I mean, it's not as big as O, but, you know, I mean, the bigger you go in scale, there's always a trade-off in space. And so I'm modeling a switching layout. I like switching, and that works for me. And so, first of all, you have to determine what your real interest is. I mean, if in a smaller layout, it's harder to do real mainline trains. I mean, it just isn't a whole lot of room for that. So then what do? Do you model a switching layout, or do you model a yard or an engine facility or something like that? And also I found that if you're in a room, it might be better to do an around the wall shelf layout rather than to have a table in the center of the room, because you're going to gain, you know, if you're going around the perimeter of the room, and you'll have more space. So that might be a thought too, to just do it around the wall. Sometimes if you do that, you have to have a lift out section for the doorway.
Right.
You know, that kind of thing. But yeah, think about it a little more and get back to us. Develop a theme for your railroad and go from there.
All right. We've got a question from a guest coming in next. I have a brass track cleaning car. How do I make it look realistic? It is a tanker, HO scale.
Oh, now that could be a clean machine. That could be a Tony's clean machine if he's talking about that brass tank car. Well, you can, I mean, it's brass. You can paint it like anything else. I mean, it just basically, when you're cleaning the track, it's not supposed to be pretty. You just do it, and you know. But I know people that do. I suppose you could even put a boxcar body over it. What the heck, you know? Get a boxcar body that fits and make it look good. But you could certainly clean off that brass and put a primer on it and paint it and decal it, and sure, why not?
Turn it into something else.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Let's move on to Gary's question. My G-scale LGB track cleaner car had one of the pads fall off. What material can I use to replace the pad? Thanks.
I'm trying to think. I think those are pretty hard, as I remember, because I've repaired some of the LGB, and they're pretty hard abrasive block. I mean, it would be more like a Bright Boy type of an abrasive block. And they do make those abrasive blocks for bigger scales. You might have to do a little searching on that. I know that HO scale block is called a Bright Boy, and that might work size-wise. But you know, I also use the foam sanding blocks, like a 3M foam sanding block, and then of course, you know, you can take a bread knife and cut them, saw them, and cut them to any size you want. So maybe something like that would work too.
All right, well, we are going to keep on moving through these last few questions that are coming in. We have a few moments left, so keep them coming. If we can get to them, we'll just keep on going until the very end of the hour. We have a nice little comment coming in, too. I love what you are doing. Please keep it up. God bless model railroading.
All right.
What a fun community. This
keeps us out of trouble at night, yeah.
That's right. Another guest is asking, do you have any tips for hiding all the wires under my layout? There's tons of wires underneath.
Well, normally it's underneath your scenery. It shouldn't be a problem, or even underneath your bench work.
Oh, really?
So, I mean, you certainly don't want to put wiring where you can't access it, or you're going to be asking for trouble. Because we mentioned that the one thing in model railroading, the one axiom is, it always goes bad where you can't get to it.
That's right.
It never goes bad right in the front. Always goes bad someplace where you can't get to it. So keep your wiring accessible. And normally, people will drill holes in their bench work, so the wiring can pass through, and you can use wire ties and make it look real pretty, and color code it and all that kind of stuff. And so whatever you do, I would recommend keep the wiring accessible and keep it under the scenery.
All right.
Well below the scenery.
But still where
Yeah,
you can reach
yeah.
it. Well, I'm not seeing any new questions popping in just yet, but to give everyone a little bit more time to get those last minute questions in, is there anything coming up for either that trip to England, what you've been up to recently that you might want to slide in and chat about before we start to wrap up?
Well, I was going to just have a couple of teasers here for things in the future, but this is, I wanted to show this. This is where I was at in Savannah, Georgia, the Georgia State Railroad Museum. And we're doing that camera. Georgia State Railroad Museum, and this is really a fantastic site. If you haven't been there, I'd recommend going there. And Savannah itself is a fantastic town. Have you ever been there?
Beautiful town, yes.
Oh yeah, my son and I walked all over the place. Walked about 5 miles, looking at all the parks and statues and fountains and everything. And then my other favorite place on the trip was. This is another one. This is the brochure on the Saluda Depot. And about once a month they have railroad seminars in there. People show up and do seminars. It's such a cool, the whole town is all historic, and such a neat aura. And people love to come there and just talk about trains.
Yeah.
So that's the brochure on that. And we'll, like I say, we'll talk about that more in the future. And I'll have some pictures. I actually have pictures of the grade there, the 4 to 5% grade coming up to Saluda, the abandoned grade.
That'll be exciting to see.
Out of service grade. So it is, it's fantastic. And you can actually, there are videos on YouTube. You can actually see videos of the grade when they were running trains up there. And then plus the Delay and Block Productions did the drone footage.
Oh, yes.
So
that'd be fun to check out. All right, we've got another question that just came in from a guest. Oh, this is fun. Have you ever had to move your layout?
Well, not for quite a while, but I have, and it's not really fun. And I've moved big layouts. My buddy Bill Briggs, who since passed away, but he built what ended up being a 1,500 square foot model railroad, and it got to be, every time he'd move, he'd get a bigger train room. It had to be kind of a sort of a joke after a while. He said, well, I got to move. I don't have enough room for my layout. But it was built in a way that it was kind of not completely modular, but kind of semi-modular, so we could get it apart. It was big sections, but we could certainly get it out of the house. And so, if you have thoughts of moving, I would say build your benchwork in a way that it, bolt it together in modules so you can get it apart and move it. You never know.
Just in case.
Yeah, my layouts stand put for quite a while, I think.
Well, that's probably, that would be how I would have to do it, rather than try and carefully move it.
It's not only the house, it's everything else you got to move.
That's right, all through the doorways. Yeah. Here's a good question. Do you have any advice for blending scenery into the backdrop?
I was talking about that with somebody just the other day, and John Allen is just an amazing guy, and is very talented, and he built this layout in Monterey, California, and he actually started showing photos of his layout, I think actually maybe in the late 40s or early 50s. And he was an artist and a professional photographer, and he did things that model railroaders never thought of. But he would, for example, do a tree against the backdrop, but it'd be half a tree. So you'd have half of it would be three-dimensional, the other half would be two-dimensional. They do the same thing with all kinds of other scenery. Oh. And then you also use mirrors in a very tricky way, so that it would actually make the scenery look like it was going beyond the backdrop. And as I say, he was an artist, and he did a heck of a job at it.
That's fantastic.
If anybody wants to read the story about John Allen, there's actually a book that's been out there about John Allen and his model railroad. Just an amazing guy, and I was so lucky. I saw it when I was, I don't know, probably early teens or something like that. I was out there with my parents, and my dad took me over there, and it just blew my mind. I still can't forget it.
Well, that's fantastic. Robert just shot a quick thank you for doing these live shows. All this great information, Doug. It's really great. And then we've got a fun question from Jay Rush. How is the wind outside not blowing you guys away? How are we doing it?
Well, you have to anchor yourself down. That's bulk up. That's the whole idea is bulk up in the winter.
That's right.
And yeah, then you don't get blown away. But yeah, it is kind of windy out there today.
We do have a couple more questions that are coming in. We'll get to as many as possible before we have to say goodbye this month. A little comment from Dwight, Northern Star Railroad Line says, the best way for clean track is polishing rail with a steel washer. It won't scratch the rail. Then a coat of wax made for cars. So car wax.
Wouldn't the wax affect the conductivity? Well, it might be slippery. What if you're trying to go up grade and your track is slippery? I don't know. Well, anyway, hey, it's great. We love to hear these ideas. And be sure and send in your ideas too. We want to hear ideas.
And what works.
Comments. And if you want to insult the host, you can do that. You know, hey, anything. We're good with anything here. So,
speak for yourself.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah. So, yeah, for sure, send us your comments. We'd love to hear them.
Oh, Dennis has a question here. I just recently got an HO scale turbo train, fixed the one coupler, ran it, and then after about an hour, one of the traction wheels broke in two. Do you have any idea why?
Well, it could be just bad from the factory. I mean, that shouldn't happen. I mean, you should be able to run that thing for years.
Instead of just 1 hour.
So I would get a hold of, who was it, Bachman that made that? I would get a hold of Bachman, and they're good about their customer service. So I think it's Bachman. Get a hold of the manufacturer and tell them it broke, and they'd probably give you a whole new wheel and axle set.
All right, well, hopefully that'll work out for you. Gary is coming into the chat. Favorite places? Vintopna Railway Restaurant in Prague. Ooh, huge restaurant serviced by G-scale cars. Order your brewskis, and a few minutes later, an LGB train shows up with your beers on the flat cars. The trains will even come to your table, pick up the empties, and deliver refills. You have to go there to really enjoy the G-scale. Maybe the next trip will have to be to Prague.
I was going to say, how about we do a Track Talk Live right from the bar? I think Leah and I will go over there, and then we'll do a show right from the bar. You get it set up, and we'll be there.
That would be really fun. Ooh. We're going to end with this question, I believe, unless some other ones pop in. This is the last one I see from Jay Rush asking, Doug, since you are known as Clickety, is there a Mr. Clack?
Well, you know, there is a Mr. Clack, although he got busy with his real job.
Oh.
And so couldn't keep doing the shows. But if you look back in the history on the website, the MRA website, you'll see Mr. Clack. And he is an S scale. He and I are both an S scale.
Oh, like the dynamic duo.
And still modeling. He is really busy with his real job, which is in a video production business.
Oh, fantastic. Well, that's great. I'm going to keep a quick eye any last-minute questions that pop in, but until then, any last-minute things you want to share with us before we're going to say goodbye?
We will talk more about the UK trip again next month, and if you have any questions about anything, you can send those in, and we'll try to answer them. And if I can answer them, I'll get a hold of my buddies over there in the UK and get them to answer the questions. So,
perfect.
Yeah, don't be shy about it. Just
and we're going to try to get into a little bit of a mess next time.
Yeah, very well could be with the famous Chooch Brevard.
So really exciting stuff coming up in November. Thank you so much for joining us today for Track Talk Live. Yeah. As always, this is Doug. I'm Leah. Have a good one.